Have you been thinking about picking up an RTX 3070? What about a 3060 Ti? Is the RTX 3070 that much better, or should you save the cash and go buy a bigger hard drive for the new Call of Duty? Let's find out. I want to make this decision as simple as possible for you. The two cards I'm going to be comparing today are the Asus ROG Strix RTX 3070 OC and the EVGA RTX 3060 Ti XC Gaming. On the surface, these two cards don't seem that much different. Let me explain. Both these GPUs are built on the GA104 die. However, the RTX 3070 has a 300 designator and the RTX 3060 Ti has a 200 series designator. The RTX 3070 has 5,888 CUDA cores, while the 3060 Ti has 4,864. My Asus card boosts to 1935 MHz, while the EVGA card only boosts to 1710. Now, both cards share 8 GB of VRAM with a 448 GB per second memory speed on a 256-bit memory bus. Now, power requirements are a little bit different. The Asus card requires a 750 watt minimum power supply with two 8-pin power connectors, while the EVGA card only requires a 600 watt power supply with one 8-pin power connector. The main advantage the 3060 Ti has over the 3070 is price. But we'll talk about that after performance benchmarks, because that's where the 3070 has the advantage. I want to talk about two different types of benchmarks, gaming benchmarks and productivity benchmarks. I'll start with the gaming benchmarks first. All game testing was done with my makeshift test bench you see here. It's kind of like an open air test setup, but I'm too cheap to buy one, so this is what you get. I use the highest quality presets with ray tracing and DLSS or FSR turned off. I'll also leave a parts list for my test setup below in case you want to replicate this. The results seen are a 3-run average across each game in both 1080p and 1440p. The first game tested was Forza Horizon 5. I used the built-in benchmark for this test. In 1080p gaming, the 3070 only has about an 11% lead on the 3060 Ti. This could be due to a bottleneck created by the CPU. When jumping up to 1440p, the 3070's gap increases to about 21%. The next game up is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This was also the built-in benchmark. Once again, the difference in 1080p performance is quite small, with the RTX 3070 only holding about a 5% lead over the 3060 Ti. Increasing resolution to 1440p nets the 3070 a 15% performance win. Cyberpunk 2077 has had some recent updates to the game, which put out some interesting performance numbers. I actually ran the test 6 times instead of 3 because I didn't believe the results. In 1080p, the RTX 3070 achieved 126.6 FPS average, while the 3060 Ti only managed to hit 77. That's a 39% decrease in performance for the 3060 Ti at 1080p. When looking at 1440p, the 3070 increases that number to a 46% difference. I have no idea why the performance gap is so big between these two cards in Cyberpunk. I triple checked the results and ran the performance test multiple times because I thought I was doing something wrong. Do you have either of these cards at home? Are you seeing similar performance numbers in a game like Cyberpunk? The only thing I can think of is the settings were on ultra settings, no ray tracing or anything, but maybe that has something to do with it because this game is so graphically intense. I mean, it's kind of like the modern day Crysis at this point. The last game I played is Overwatch 2. I say played because there's no built-in benchmark, so that's my only option. At 1080p, the RTX 3070 achieved 222.9 FPS average, while the 3060 Ti hit 164.3. That's a 26% difference at 1080p. At 1440p, the 3060 Ti lowered the 3070's lead to a 17% difference. I also wanted to look at the productivity side of these two cards. I don't have a whole lot of things I can do for testing, but I did run a Blender benchmark to see if you wanted to use these things for 3D rendering or CAD. The Blender benchmark runs a series of 3 tests: the monster scene, junk shop, and the classroom. I don't really know much about interpreting the results other than its samples per minute, and the higher the better. The 3070 scored higher in every test, as you can see, but not by that much. Both cards are limited by the 8 gigs of VRAM, and in something like CAD rendering, you want as much RAM as you can get. So I'd say either aren't ideal versus something like a used 2080 Ti, which comes with 11 gigabytes of VRAM instead. Now, with all the performance out on the table, it comes down to one thing: price. I'm only comparing new prices, not used deals, since they can vary by location. I guess new prices do too. Oh well. The cheapest RTX 3070 I was able to find is over on Amazon. It's the Zotac model, or you can pick up the Gigabyte Vision, which is on Newegg. They're both $529 USD. The cheapest 3060 Ti I could find is $399. It's also a Zotac model over on Amazon, or you can pick up the Founders model if you can find it somewhere. So $130 more for a 21% increase at 1080p and a 23% increase at 1440p in gaming. And in productivity benchmarks, they're very similar, at least from what I could tell. So what's my final recommendation for the 3070? If you skipped right to the end, good for you, you're really smart. This is what you've been waiting for. The 3070 gives you more CUDA cores and a higher power draw, which in turn provides you with about a 22% increase in gaming performance, whether you play at 1080p or 1440p. This ends up costing you more money not only for the initial price of the card, but also the fact that you'll need a higher power supply and more power draw on your total system. One thing I want you to remember, the CPU bottlenecks still exist, as you can see in a couple of the games, at 1080p. So if you decide that you're not going to play at 1440p or higher, either one of these cards would be fine. You should probably just save yourself the money, get the 3060 Ti, and buy a faster CPU. But if you want to play AAA titles like Cyberpunk 2077 on maxed out settings, the 3070 is your go-to, because clearly it was leaps and bounds better than the 3060 Ti, which I still don't understand why. I didn't use the most high-end CPU. My test bench is already built. It's got a B550 motherboard in it, and I used a Ryzen 5 5600X. It's a pretty decent CPU, and I think it was representative of what most people are willing to buy these days, especially with the way prices are now. So that's why my test setup has that CPU. As soon as I can afford to get something like a 5800X 3D, I'll pop that into the test bench and see what my results would be with something like a 3070 or 3060 Ti. So your results may vary if you have a better CPU than what I have. I was actually really impressed with the performance increase that the 3070 saw in the couple games that I tested. It makes me curious and want to see how it would pair with a better CPU. That sounds like a good idea for a video. But you'll have to wait till next time, because as I always say, I'm Danny with Danny's Tech Channel, and I'll see you in the next one. 'Cause we're like alpha and